All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Monitor and Assess. Thanks for sticking with us through what has been a really full day. I'm incredibly excited to introduce this session with three really thoughtful folks, really at the cutting edge of AI. So today we've got a conversation with, and I'll go in order they appear on my screen, Peter Gault, hereafter Peter, who is the founder of Quill.org, which is an AI-powered writing feedback platform that gives students feedback on their writing using AI. We've also got, confusingly, Peter York, hereafter Pete, who is Project Evidence' very own chief data scientist and leads our data and analytics function. And we've got the fabulous Laila Brenner, who is the head of philanthropy at TalkingPoints, which is an AI-powered family engagement tool that helps families, multilingual families, engage with their schools in their native languages. So welcome, everybody. Super excited to have you here today. So let's start with a softball. Let's start with a very easy question of, how do you know when your AI tool is not being successful, and how do you give high quality feedback to change that?
And Sarah, would you like me to kick things off?
I would love that.
So I really love how Sarah's framed it as, how do you know when it's unsuccessful? I think when we talk about AI, we hear a lot about all these amazing things AI can do. But when you're building something for students, you have this big responsibility to understand what are all the failure modes of how your program could go wrong. And then how do you build all these guardrails into it to address those possible risks? That's a huge part of our work at Quill, that we are providing coaching and feedback to millions of students each school year. Students write and receive feedback on more than 500 million sentences over the course of a year. And so if our AI is misunderstanding the students, if it's giving them bad feedback or bad coaching, we really can create a harm for students that we take really seriously. And so for Quill, what that means is not coaching them in the same way that a teacher would if a teacher was sitting down next to a student and providing that one-to-one coaching. And so with Quill, we when we think about success, it's how do we mirror how a veteran educator provides coaching. And then we think about failure modes, we think about all the ways that things can go wrong here, such as the AI just telling the student the answer, which isn't enabling the student to do their own thinking. And so internally at Quill, our evaluation infrastructure, which I'm really excited to share with this group today, has been built on years and years of mapping out all these failure modes, building big data sets around that, and then using that to ensure that this is working well at scale.
Oh, Pete, I know that you think a lot about ways that we use data in evaluation. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, along those lines, I think that we have an opportunity now to begin to think about part of the question of failure is kind of like failure for whom. So a big part of what I think that in my background experience, and I'm not the one kind of designing the tools that are leveraging AI for educational purposes or programmatic purpose, but when we sort of evaluate their success, one of the things we've learned is that it really does depend upon the context. It depends on who it is that is using the tools. And when we evaluate it, we've become to really appreciate the idea that one size doesn't fit all. So part of it is also thinking about how in any delivery of the kinds of tools is how the process of figuring out what's the right way to deliver the answer to a very different set of youth in this case. So when it comes down to it, context matters. So when we look at it, part of it is how you evaluate your success. Do you evaluate your success for its overall accuracy in relation to some outcome that you're kind of gauging your algorithm to? Is it based on averages, or is it based on really disaggregating and looking at the accuracy for different types of learners? Things like cultural context, literacy levels, digital fluency, what students are coming in with, the kind of things that Peter was talking about too, that teachers know through their experience how to tailor the use of any kind of educational tool or any other kind of intervention tool to be able to really tailor it. And that's a cornerstone of this, is disaggregating and appreciating those different groups, because those are all factors that make the experience different. You might have 10% of students who actually, in the way it's typically delivered, it doesn't, not only does it not help, but it actually harms their growth and progress. And yet, if we just rolled everything up, we would say it's 90% accurate or it's 90% good. And we're missing some of those important nuances that we have to pay attention to. And in most of the context we're talking about in education in particular.
Absolutely. Laila, I know the point that Peter's making around disaggregation and making sure it's working for everybody with all the different groups and their different needs resonates with the way that you guys think about this too. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think about equity and working and making sure that your tool is working for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this contextual piece is so relevant to Talking Points. So our mission is to really drive student success by unlocking the power of families to help their children succeed. And part of what we do is we provide a digital platform that helps schools and families build really strong relationships, and that has to be through trusted communication. So, so many families are often left out of this communication, often because they can't speak the language. So we've spent 10 years building this very education specific contextual translation model. And it's really important that that works across the 150 plus languages that we serve. So I'll give an example. During COVID, there was a lot of talk around hotspots, right? And to all of us, that makes perfect sense. Like, having equitable access to digital internet, and having little hotspots that you can use to get on there. But for other cultures, cultures in Russia, for example, hotspot means something very different and can be very triggering and traumatic. So we have to make sure that all of the training that we do for our models takes that cultural specificity into account, and also that we have humans in the loop. So it's really important that we have humans to be able to give us that feedback so that we can then build it into these models so that we aren't making those unintentional, harmful things happen in the future.
Right. That's not something I would have thought about off the bat, the different ways that something might be translated, but it makes total sense that if you're not, that you need to disaggregate the data to really get a sense of how it's working for everybody and catch those specifics. So the importance of humans in all of this kind of brings me back to Peter, the way that you guys approach evaluation, which I know really leverages the expertise of teachers. Can you, and is built into a kind of sophisticated system. Will you take us behind the scenes here and share a little bit more about how evaluation works for you guys?
Yes. So this is the second time we've ever shared this publicly. We've been building our internal systems for the past 8 years now of building our own AI, and so much of our AI work is how we evaluate it. And we've never shared it publicly before. And we decided that for this webinar, we would flip on the screen share and just take you all behind the scenes and show you what it actually looks like. So really excited to give a little sneak peek here. Before we look at our infrastructure, I'm going to first show you how Core works. So much of how you build your AI is dependent, and how you evaluate your AI is dependent on what it's trying to do. And so seeing how we support students will really help you understand our infrastructure. From there, as the session progresses, I love all and any questions that you have. So feel free to drop questions into the chat as well. I'm going to give a sort of sneak peek now of it, but really excited to be able to follow up with folks who want to go deeper. So with that being said, let me flip this on. We're going to start here with the quill activity. So just briefly, is this coming through right with the whales activity?
Yeah,
it is.
Great. What you're looking at is one of our new science activities focused on how does AI work. So we're both using AI to help students, and we're teaching kids about AI. So in this case here, the students are reading this article, how does a large language model work, and how is it used to translate whale calls into human speech? This seems like this wild sci-fi thing, but researchers are actually translating animal languages into human languages. And so in this case here, the students read, And then they're given this prompt, CD needs a large amount of data to train its large language models because ... Students will say things like, because they want to speak with whales. You press get feedback. We say, clear your response and try again. Instead of talking about the mission, explain why they need lots of data. So the big thing about Quail is that you have to build a precise response with strong evidence. This response doesn't have that strong evidence that explains why you need a large amount of data, and so you revise and improve your writing. An AI out of the box would maybe say, oh yeah, that's a fine answer. But with Quill, we're really looking for strong, precise answers. And a lot of our AI is designed towards pushing you to revise and improve your writing. So in this case here, the students go back to the article, they read it more carefully, they see that you need a lot of data. And so they may say something like, because they want to avoid misunderstandings, right? And this is a better response now. It's true, they need a large amount of data because they want to avoid misunderstandings. You press get feedback. We say that's true, now be more specific. What could lead to these misunderstandings? And so again, a better response, but one big idea here is it's a small amount of data that can lead to misunderstandings. And so in this case here, the students go back to the article, they read it again, they pull out this idea because a small amount of data could lead to misunderstandings. Press get feedback, we say nice work. This loop seems simple, but for students, they go through multiple cycles of revising and improving the writing. And at each step, the AI is looking for very specific key ideas in their responses, and then really pushing them to bring those ideas into their writing. And that over time, they gain this ability to use strong evidence on their own without feedback. So with all that context, here's what our internal dashboard looks like. What you see here is an evaluation data set. So every time we create one of these prompts for students, we have a data set of 300 examples of how did students engage with this. We have a team of 10 educators or former educators that are scoring all of this writing. And so we've scored more than 100,000 sentences internally to do this work. With that score, we can then see how did the AI perform versus our own scoring. In this case here, what you see on the far right-hand side is the performance of the AI with no training data. So this here is 0 examples given. And the big number here is the 65 number. The 65% is how accurate was the AI in identifying strong responses with no training data. And so this is getting to what Pete was saying earlier, that the AI might work some of the time, but if it's failing for students, if it's not seeing strong responses, that's not reliable, that's not scalable. On the other hand, when you go to this next trial here, trial 21 in the middle, now we have 89 training examples that are plugged in to the AI. 88 examples in this case. And so with 88 examples of training data added to the AI, we see that the AI jumps from 65% to 97% accuracy. So in the 100 training examples of strong responses written by students, 97 of those were all correctly flagged as strong responses. And so this is really what ethical AI looks like at scale. You have to constantly be building data sets, testing your production data against those data sets, and then using that data to improve the core system. And so in this case here, if you scroll down, you can see some of the examples where in this row right here, the AI, out of the box got it wrong. This is what it said to the student. And then with training data, this is the response that you now get. The conclusion that we want people to take away from all of this is that AI is a very flexible technology. You can do a lot with training data to improve AI for how your use case and how you're trying to serve your clients. And then if you have training data and you have a way of measuring it, you can constantly feed in data and really improve how the AI performs. But if you don't have these things, you're just hoping and praying that the AI on its own does what you want it to do. And so I hope by just sharing that little sneak peek, you can see how that cycle that we use to build our work, and that will translate in some way to whatever you all are doing in your own work, and how you can set up that loop to really ensure that you're best serving who you're trying to serve in the best and most effective way possible.
I think it's really impressive to see the concrete example of how much data matters. You're not building just the off-the-shelf large language models, even though these foundational models are incredibly powerful and getting better by the second. It's still not giving you what you need until you're able to integrate the real world data with that. makes me think also, Laila, about how you guys approach your translation model. Can you share a little bit more about how your model works and how you guys are ensuring accuracy?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to double down on this. The data is so important. So the more data you give it, the smarter that it gets and the more accurate that it gets, which is so important when you're really facilitating this communication. So we have now over 1.5 billion conversations that we have been able to train our model on. And I think it might be helpful just to see a little bit how this works. We have a little video we can show. If we can see that up, that'd be great.
I think I'm going to require from now on that all videos that people include have like really jaunty background music, because that was exactly the 4 p.m. pick me up we all needed.
Well, shout out and thanks to our funders over at Google who helped us put that together and support so much of this work. And as you can see, it's all of that feedback that we're getting that really makes sure we are able to translate these messages in such specific ways to the educational context. And we all know there's a lot of jargon in the education world, and for families who English isn't their first language, they may have a lower literacy level. Even for families like me, it's really hard to navigate the education system. So we want to make that as simple as possible. And I think one thing I also want to mention, I talked about the importance of humans before, and ethical AI really requires humans driving this. It's not about replacing humans, it's about superpowering them. So we make sure that educators have full agency in every message that is sent to a family. So an educator has the last eyes, and they can accept and approve, they can edit, they can reject a message, and those rejections, right, are huge feedback loops for us. We know something isn't working, something isn't being translated correctly, so that we can really make sure we go in and make it work in the way that it needs to.
So there's really a continuing theme about the role that humans are playing in effective monitoring and assessment. So we've talked a lot about kind of how you get these models working well for your purpose. And now I want to go to the next step as we are starting to get them ready to go live in front of real people. So I'm gonna hand this to Peter. You have an early access group that you use as a final testing tool before you release. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works and why you added that step to your process?
So we work with a group of more than 600 teachers in our advisory council, and that everything that we build goes to them first. And so, we often talk about building with and not for, and obviously doing testing is a good thing. In the world of AI, it goes from a nice to have to a need to have. That everything that you're building, you never really know how it's going to perform for students when it's out in the wild. And that without those loops built in to improve something, you really risk creating a harmful experience. But that if you can set up those loops, that's how you can get from good to great. And so in our case here, these 600 teachers have opted into this program where they are piloting the new offerings, the new activities. It's operating in a controlled rollout, and it allows us to carefully measure how well is the AI performing for these students. This group is 68% at Title I low-income schools. And for us, that's obviously really critical that the data coming in is going to shape how this performs at scale with millions of students. And so having that group of teachers intentionally to be able to work with and collaborate with is what gives us this confidence that this is ready for prime time. And so as we think about others, we think every organization using AI should have its advisory council. It should be as many people as you can bring into it. And it's really important to pay these people. We send out a ton of gift cards as a way of compensating people for their time. And it allows us to really build something that we know is going to work well as a result. I'm happy to go into some of the details for folks who have more questions on this, but it's something that we highly encourage others that every organization is thinking about as they're building with AI, specifically for vulnerable populations.
So it really strikes me that you're not just putting any humans in the loop. You're trying to put the humans with the real expertise that you're trying to build off into that loop and build off that specific experience, not just some humans, and that you're making sure you're compensating people for that expertise that you're using. So it's kind of an arrangement that works for everybody. I think that's so important to do in a non-exploitative fashion. And this really ties back to the issues we were talking about earlier, Pete, around equity and around making sure everything works for everyone. So as you're moving to roll out with the tool, what processes can organizations think about using to detect unintended consequences or disparities in outcomes, especially across different groups of people?
It's a great question. I'm going to piggyback off of a lot of what's already been said in the examples that were provided specifically. So I think one of the things that's been mentioned is so important in terms of the humans in the loop is also something that I don't think we talk a lot about, which is all the training that is being done to get these algorithms to give you the kind of answers that were demonstrated by Peter. And actually, Laila, what you were sharing as well in terms of the feedback loop that's happening with the users are updating. So in many ways, like Peter was talking about how the teachers are important, and we brought up the fact that they're like experts who can bring in some feedback and help with the validation process of the training. Additionally, I think that the tools, the translational tool that Laila, you were demonstrating, brings in those with the lived experience and how they're also bringing in insights. And that feedback is data that's collected. One of the ways we always continue to do this work is the training never stops, right? What you end up doing is you build these algorithms, but things change in people's lives. Context shifts. All kinds of things matter. All of a sudden, something's going on in the world that changes something. COVID hits. And so all of these algorithms have to continuously do that work. And where the real insights are, I'm going to draw attention to something that Peter shared, which is what he shared was that 2x2 matrix, where he showed the lower percentage success and then the higher one. As you start to monitor, so in many ways, you have to keep running those models to see if the data is continuing to hold up as predictive. The really important insights that we can learn from those with the lived experience and those with the experts is actually not in the where they get it right, the true positives and true negatives. That 2x2 table has two areas called false positives and false negatives. And even if you looked in the 14, was it 97% or 93%, that matrix that you were talking, the confusion matrix, Peter? Was it 90?
It was 97% in that example.
97. What you'll notice in there, which is really remarkable, that's great. But imagine in the future, if that changed a little bit, it started to drop down a little bit, or 86 or whatever, it's going to be important to learn from those in the two true positives, true negatives. Who are the ones in the error in those boxes where we didn't get it right lies insights, and who do we talk to? And I'm going to come back to the point I made earlier. That's where if we can talk to the teachers, we can talk to the students, we can talk to those using the tool, the translational tool that you gave an example, find those cases. What is it about them? Is there contextual factors that have changed? Are there certain things? Can we disaggregate to see, is there something unique going on with those in that space? That's how we can bring our human piece, right? The humans in the loop is investigating the error in real time. And how can we learn from the people that are represented in those data points? I think there was like 14 in one part of the box and one case in the true positive, true negative parts. Eventually, if that percentage dropped from 97 to 85, Peter's tools would probably want to go back in and figure out, oh, we've got to adjust. And part of the question in Laila's tools kind of bring back to as well is kind of like, well, maybe there's something in the way the language is with a particular group of people in terms of their context, their culture changes, other things. I often say the real learning from a human side is in the error. We often want it gone, but in the end, it's an ongoing meter as to kind of like telling us, hey, it's like a radar of where we should be investigating people to people and find out who's in those errors and how can we fix things, not to lose the positive results, but to meet them where they need to.
Absolutely.
And if I could
Oh, Peter, go ahead.
jump on that. I just dropped a link to that confusion matrix in the chat, but it is absolutely right that that's where all the learning lies, is where those things are falling short. And so that's, there's a lot of learning there. When we start our process, I share that 65% number, that was the baseline for us. And I think that's what people should expect, is that when you're building with AI, it's going to work some of the time for what you want it to do, but that you shouldn't give up if it's not working quite as you want it to. You just have to investigate those failure modes and then build off of it. And while AI will get smarter over time, you're trying to do a particular thing for a particular audience, and the AI is trained on the entire internet to do everything. And so everyone's going to have this translation problem of how do you translate the base capabilities of a model to a particular population that you're trying to serve and how you're trying to serve them. And so sometimes it might just work out of the box, but by building these data sets, you can really get from like, okay, this is kind of working to this is great. And it all comes through just investigating and learning. It's all very doable though, and it's doable now with a small team in a way that wasn't possible in the past, which makes this all very exciting.
So let's
Yeah,
say,
and can I just add to that really quickly, Sarah? Like I think a really important process piece of this, especially for organizations who are starting to do this, is that continual evaluation. So for example, you need to have a KPI around accuracy levels, and you need to have a team checking that on a weekly, biweekly, or monthly basis so that you're constantly aware of how it's performing. Because I know as humans, we like to build things, put them out into the world and hope that they're working. But I think another thing that's also really important is humans constantly trying to break these models, right? Like, what are the inputs our team can do to get the worst output so that we can avoid that happening to our actual users? So, beyond translation at Talking Points, we also have generative AI tools that help teachers generate research-based messages. One of the hardest things for an educator can be like, how do I start a really difficult conversation with a teacher? Well, you can put in a keyword, you can put in a sentence, and we'll help you transform that message, and the teacher can edit it to be in their tone. We help teachers generate really personalized, culturally affirming at-home learning activities, and making sure that, like, as we are building these tools, we are trying to break the models so that we know then how to prevent that into the future.
so you're doing a little kind of ad hoc, or maybe not so ad hoc, red teaming there to see about to generate those failure modes. So now we're kind of talking about the transition from we've done our evaluation, we've built the model that works, we've done our early stage testing, and now it's in the wild and we're assessing it in real time. Before we dive into some more of the details of what that kind of ongoing assessment looks like, I want to double click on why we care about this so much. What are the stakes if AI fails?
Yeah, I mean, I can kick us off. The stakes are really high, right? Similar to Peter, Talking Points serves over 70% of Title I schools in our community, and so many of these families, every family wants to support their child's education, and many haven't had the ability to do so because of the barriers that I mentioned earlier: time, technology, resources, language. And if we get a translation wrong, that can ruin a relationship between an educator and teacher, which can ruin a pivotal moment in a student's life to be able to then, thrive and succeed into the future. So getting this communication right for the communities that we're serving, particularly vulnerable communities, the stakes could not be higher.
We've talked a lot about generative AI and kind of, well, we're thinking about the stakes. Pete, do you want to comment a little bit on, in this sort of world of predictive AI, which is kind of the ignored cousin of generative AI, but still I think is really important in the nonprofit world? What are the stakes if that doesn't work well?
Sure. The stakes are actually something that I think's been a challenge all along, which is that, there's always the challenge of any time we draw conclusions that are correlational, not causal, we run the risk of perpetuating different kinds of biases, cognitive biases, social biases, other types of biases. We should note it's not something we haven't been doing throughout all of history. The challenge we have with respect to the stakes that AI brings is we're just making it superpowered. So if we don't pay attention to these things, if we don't understand context, we don't have feedback loops, we don't have learning loops, we don't embrace the error as our opportunity to learn more about the people that are behind the data and finding out what's working. If we just apply predictive modeling, as we've done in the past with machine learning, statistical modeling, all the way through now, which large language models, in my opinion, shouldn't actually be used for prediction. They should be used for explanation, interpretation. They're a very powerful tool, but we really should stick with some of the tools. There are other machine learning tools and AI tools for prediction, and they can be used together. I don't mean that they can't do it, but they have to do it through writing code, which is a very different process than what people are used to when they think of generative AI in the chatbot sense, okay? But the real risk we run and the stakes we take, I'm worried mostly about all the biases we already have, where we don't disaggregate, we don't appreciate what works for whom under what situation, we don't control for context, the correlation causation bias. The biggest concern I have is that there is no causal reasoning in AI. Okay, they're not trained that way. They're trained to predict the next word for language, and they're getting trained on reinforcement learning, which is whatever we think is reinforcing. So we're expediting this, and AI in use, prediction to humans when it comes out on a dashboard always looks like causation. But if we're not careful, we're going to be drawing really incorrect conclusions, or some group is going to be excluded from the benefit, even though it benefits more than not. So I really do think that the stakes here are bigger because of just how powerful and how fast, how economical, how much it can do for us now. But it's really just exacerbating and exponentially growing that which we humans have been doing for years anyway.
I got a great question in the Q&A box that I'm going to elevate. I encourage everybody to put their questions into that Q&A box so we can integrate them into the conversation. But I've got a great follow-up question on how do you balance being aware of those high stakes, but also championing, bringing innovation so we can keep moving the sector forward? Peter, I might hand this to you first because I know that you are kind of really working on that space.
Yeah, it's really tough. You're constantly needing to. One of the big challenges that we face is that the models keep changing. And so you're playing this game of AI is moving so fast that you build something and then AI changes and then you build to that new thing and then it changes again and then you build to that new thing. And I guess the answer here is that things will stabilize a little bit over time. So if you feel a lot of FOMO of like you're missing AI, just know that it's been a lot of churn internally as the technology keeps changing. And that's been really tough. The way that we think about it is that we try to be focus on the smaller the project, the better. The AI work can spiral, and you can do one thing, and then that starts the next thing, which starts the third thing. So finding those really small tests, finding those things that you can build quickly, becomes a very rapid way of stress testing different technologies and how they work. Over time, then that will lead to bigger projects and bigger goals. The more that you try to sort of start with at the beginning, the more you're going to sort of spin your wheels as the technology under the hood keeps evolving. So again, it will stabilize. It will get easier. It's already happening now, but there still is a lot happening in the space. But being really intentional with those experiments and starting small is really the way to sort of ensure success here.
Absolutely. Laila, you guys were kind of doing machine translation before it was cool, as it were. How did you think about kind of bringing that really cutting edge innovation to a really sensitive space? What advice do you have for people?
Yeah, I'm going to bring a little bit of a different flavor into the conversation. So, as all of us working at social impact organizations know, we can't do this work without the funding that we get to do this. And so many philanthropies are really excited, right, about the innovation. But at the end of the day, what is most important to all of us are the outcomes, right? Those are the high stakes that we're talking about, right? Are we delivering the outcomes or are we not delivering the outcomes? So we, number one, approached first building the translation model as an equity issue. Their families that were not able to actually engage and be empowered in supporting their child's education. It was really important that we broke down those barriers and brought those families in, but also really important that we did it in a way that provided accurate translation, right? That sub doesn't mean a submarine or a sub sandwich, that it actually means a substitute teacher. And so just being really transparent with our funders, getting those feedback loops. And I think, something that you said, Peter, really resonated is there's a lot out there and the models are very quickly changing right now. So beyond our machine translation model, which we're lucky enough to have been doing for 8 years and have these 1.5 billion conversations as this super rich data set to learn from, with some of this newer generative AI work as our team is building, they're building on all the models to test which one is most accurate, which one actually exacerbates biases, and we should pull out of the mix. I mean, we were just doing a grant application a few weeks ago, and one of the questions was, what models are you using? And I think there were 4 or 5, right, that our R&D team wanted us to list because that's what we're testing on. So I think just being really intentional about how you're doing this and then being really transparent with those that are giving you the funding to make it possible so that we're all learning together, and the lessons that we learn, everyone else can benefit from.
I'm sorry, can I jump in real quickly just to make a comment about this? Because I'm going to build on 2 words that Laila just used, the transparency and together. I just want to note that one of the things how a lot of innovation was grounded, I've done a lot of work over the past few years with the National Science Foundation, and how I appreciate and come to the realization that so much innovation was hinging on a knowledge development and generation process that required transparency and peer review. Think of that as our togetherness. When we think about a lot of our innovation, if we don't continue to hold our AI innovation, if AI becomes the innovator and we lose transparency and the process of being able to work together to pace this and bring this in a responsible way, things like, even when you look at things nowadays with approval processes for medications and safety and all this kind of stuff, there's a reason we have certain things like transparency, replication, peer review, all these factors are there. If all of a sudden innovation is getting handed over to AI and we don't bring those things in, I think we run some real risks. And from that standpoint, I think if we're going to advance innovation, we keep it going. We can speed up those processes because of AI, but we shouldn't let AI take over and not be able to see what's going on and collaborate around it.
Absolutely. I got a really fantastic follow-up question and around Laila's point, which was, as innovators, do you find that you attract more creative kind of venture capital rather than traditional foundation funders? And how do your funders measure and evaluate your success? I definitely want to hear both Laila and Peter's take on this.
Laila, you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah, I can get started, and I know Peter has a lot of experience with this too. I think it has shifted, especially more recently. In the beginning, it's a lot of technology-minded funders, right? The entire philanthropic landscape has shifted in the last 15 years, where the biggest philanthropists are living founders who have often made their money through technology. And so innovation is at their core, and they understand that. And I think that's where a lot of our philanthropic support has come from. But there's also been a shift in the last maybe 1.5 years, 2 years, where more traditional funders are coming to the table and they're saying, we need to be a part of this. And also, we need to learn alongside of you. They're from legacy foundations with founders, who were around when the world was a much different place. So, just again, like doubling down on the fact that the more we can all learn together and share these lessons with each other, the richer the social impact space will be, the more informed funders will be, and the better like we will all be for it.
Absolutely.
To piggyback on that, when our funders are looking at Quill, there's an evaluation story that happens over many years. We are at the point where we have independent research studies that show that Quill works, that students using Quill are improving in their writing skills. We see that there's about a 1.6x rate of growth for improving writing skills after using Quill and completing our full intervention. But that didn't happen overnight. That happened after a long series of building, testing, improving. And so as we think about evaluation, there are more immediate measures as well. When it comes to AI, that confusion matrix is really interesting. And some of our funders actually look at those numbers. What does the accuracy look like? How are you improving it? How well is this performing? Teachers and students can provide real data, right? With AI, it's easy to be impressed by a demo, but seeing how is it actually working in the classroom gives you some of those real data points. And that those can be immediate things that you can look at to say, okay, is this idea worth backing? Knowing that research study that will happen might happen a couple of years in the future, but you need to sort of get to that point. AI is so much high upfront R&D and then long tail high impact. The cost of running Quill is less than $1 per student for all the impact that we create. And so while there are some pretty high upfront costs that we raise millions of dollars towards building with our AI, it will serve students for decades to come. And so building something that then reaches scale creates a massive impact. It's very hard to do by hand. And so that's the model here. It's a very high risk, high reward investment. And then encourage funders to think about that as part of their portfolio, that they may have some lower risk bets that are more certain to happen, but may have higher upfront costs. AI fits more in that high risk, high reward territory. But when it does work, you can see in organizations like Quill and TalkingPoints, just a massive level of impact that'd be really hard to do without technology.
I think that's really cool. And that ties back to a conversation we've been having throughout the day around evaluation and how this connects back to the outcomes that you guys are trying to drive. Pete, can you help us kind of connect the dots between the real-time assessment, the student data that you're collecting in the short term, and then that measurement of longer-term impact?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of stuff here that's hitting on it. I mean, I think part of what we're also hearing is just the importance of your continuation of being able to get this feedback data and continuously learn from the data, what the results are, what those confusion matrices, in other words, what, where it's working, where it's not, and continuously iterating. The way we start to connect that with longer term outcomes, I think is a step where we are going to have to reach another place where we start to think about how we share in some of these results more broadly, because I think everybody's contributing to direct kind of results that all have to come together eventually and continue that learning. But I have to say, I'm just really impressed by the conversation that and the work represented by Peter and Laila in terms of just how important that continuous learning, anchoring on specific outcomes, but really being able to continuously assess and get the feedback loops, and how important that is, bringing in folks that really have the lived experience and the experts into that continuous learning loop. That to me is the human side of all this work that's going to get to those outcomes and keep improving and getting the kind of results that Peter was sharing and that were demonstrated in Laila's video as well. It's just that continuous improvement. And I think part of it too is getting comfortable with the other idea when it comes to outcomes. They too might change a little bit, because what happens is everything evolves, new factors get involved. And that's again why a continuous learning loop with more of a learning orientation, where you're always trying to figure out how you're doing right now, what's working now for whom and under what circumstances, is going to get us ultimately to that longer term impact. And then we just have to be able to share that with each other.
Amazing. That is such a phenomenal note to end a really fantastic panel on. Thank you guys so much for bringing your expertise today. So we're going to move in a second to the lounges where you can follow up with any of the speakers, with me or Laila or Peter or Pete that you want to ask any follow-up questions to. And I also just want to add a pitch. We've heard a lot of demand for continuing the learning and community that's been happening today. So keep an eye on your emails. We're going to be sending out an email about the ongoing learning community that we're going to form around this, and we'll have details in that email. See you in the lounge. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.